In the North Atlantic, a former Navy operator inherits a rock, but his dog, Ghost, hears a heartbeat under stone. A brass key turns, a vault door slides, and a hidden acoustic station wakes. 0.7 hertz, the ocean's slow pulse speaks his name. As a storm hits and a hunter closes in, Ethan must choose: wield silence as a weapon or open it as a door. This isn't a fortune, it's a watch. The ceiling fan in Sterling and Associates turned with the slow rhythm of an old clock that had forgotten what hour it was. The air smelled of paper, dust, and the kind of money that had stopped breathing decades ago. Ethan Cole sat perfectly still in the high-backed chair, his spine straight from habit, not comfort. To any stranger, he looked calm. Just another quiet man in worn boots waiting for paperwork. But behind those steady, gray-blue eyes, every nerve was alive. He counted the exits, measured the weight of the crystal decanter on the desk, and listened to the faint tap of his cousin's polished shoe like it was an incoming signal. Across from him sat Evan Croft, soft around the edges, younger by 6 years, wrapped in a suit that fit like armor against humility. Evan's smile had the confidence of someone who already knew how the will would read. He had inherited charm, wealth, and the habit of speaking before thinking. The third man, Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, looked as if he'd been carved out of parchment. Every movement of his thin fingers left a whisper of paper behind. He cleared his throat, a sound like dry leaves. "We now come to the final bequests of the late Mr. Julian Croft," he said. Ethan looked up at the mention of the name. It had been 15 years since he last heard it spoken aloud. Julian Croft, his grandfather, the man who taught him to read the sea before he could read words, a face remembered only in fragments, a hand smelling of engine oil, a voice like gravel, a boat engine humming through fog. The lawyer's tone stayed steady, detached. Stocks, properties, company shares, all to Evan. With each line, Evan's grin widened. Then Sterling paused. "And to my grandson, Ethan Cole, I leave my home at Seawolf Ledge, off the coast of Maine, and everything upon it." Evan gave a short laugh. "That worthless rock? A shack and a dog?" Sterling ignored him, reading on. "This bequest is made with a specific understanding. Seawolf Ledge is given to Ethan because he is the only one in this family who understands the value of a silent watch." The words hung in the room like a bell's echo. Silent watch. To a man like Ethan, a former Navy sonar specialist who had spent half his life listening to what others couldn't hear, the phrase hit deeper than any inheritance could. For the first time in years, he felt seen. After the meeting, Evan left in a cloud of expensive cologne and bitterness. Ethan stayed behind. Mr. Sterling slid a folder across the desk. Inside were the deed, a hand-drawn map, and a name. "There's also the matter of the dog," said the lawyer. "Your grandfather's companion, a German shepherd, name's Ghost. He's been looked after by a local fisherman, Jed Larkin. He'll take you across." Ethan studied the map. A dot of rock off the Maine coast surrounded by nothing but gray. It looked like isolation carved into geography. He exhaled slowly. "My grandfather ever say why?" "He said you'd understand, when you listen long enough." The next day, Ethan drove north. 2 days of rain and empty highways. The city fell away, replaced by forests that breathed mist and silence. By the time he reached Port Clyde, the sun was a faint bruise behind the clouds. He found Jed mending nets under a yellow pier light, a man with salt in his beard and wisdom in his eyes. "You're the Croft boy," Jed said without looking up. "Name's Cole," Ethan corrected gently. "Your grandfather was a good man," Jed replied. "Didn't talk much, kept to himself. Guess it runs in the family." He gestured toward a small blue motorboat tied to the dock. Its hull was scratched but solid. In the stern, unmoving, a shadow with amber eyes, sat the dog. Ghost. The dog was massive, silver gray, with a coat like weathered steel. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail. He just watched. Ethan approached slowly, crouching to eye level. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Guess we're stuck together now." The dog tilted his head, studying him. Then, in one slow motion, he stepped forward and pressed his nose to Ethan's palm. A quiet connection sparked between them, like two sentinels recognizing the same duty. Jed smiled faintly. "He's been waiting since the old man passed. Just sits there, looking out to sea, like he knows someone's coming." Ethan nodded. "Then let's not keep him waiting any longer." The motor coughed to life with a puff of black smoke. They left the harbor behind, lights shrinking into distance, the world fading into fog and salt. Ghost stood at the bow, wind in his fur, gaze fixed on the horizon. Ethan felt something uncoil inside him, the kind of calm that only comes when the noise of the world finally stops. After 20 minutes, Jed pointed. "There, Seawolf Ledge." It rose from the ocean like a jagged tooth, waves clawing at its edges. At its peak stood a small, weather-beaten cabin, leaning against the wind like it had forgotten how to stand upright. "Hard place," Jed muttered. "Gives little, takes much. But your grandfather saw something there." "Maybe he heard something," Ethan replied. They landed in a narrow cove. The boat's hull scraped stone. Ghost leapt out first, his paws silent on wet granite. Ethan followed, boots sinking into seaweed and silt. The wind bit through his jacket. The sea roared somewhere unseen, as if warning him. The house was worse up close, boards gray with salt, shutters half torn, door hanging loose. Inside it smelled of damp wood and long-forgotten oil. He dropped his bag on the floor. The sound echoed. Ghost stood beside him, staring at the cold fireplace. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and whispered, half to himself, "Well, old man, I'm here." The silence answered, vast and heavy. That night the wind screamed. Around the ledge, Ethan built a small fire and sat in front of it. Ghost curled nearby, eyes reflecting the flames. On the mantel above the hearth he found an old brass compass, its glass cracked but still pointing north. He turned it over. On the back, scratched in rough handwriting, "The watch never ends." Ethan frowned. He set it down and listened. Beyond the hiss of the fire, beyond the storm, there was something, a vibration, so deep it felt like the earth itself was breathing. He looked at Ghost. The dog's ears twitched. The fire crackled louder, as if masking something beneath. Ethan leaned closer to the stone hearth. The sound was coming from inside the rock. Ghost stood suddenly, growling low, staring at the base of the fireplace. Ethan pressed his ear to the cold granite and heard it, a faint, rhythmic pulse, not mechanical, not natural, almost like a heartbeat. He pulled back, breathing hard. The dog watched him, amber eyes glowing in the dim light. "What the hell did you leave me, Grandpa?" Ethan whispered. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a low, distant hum that rolled through the house like a tide. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole was afraid of silence. At first light, the storm had only changed its language, not its mind. The rain no longer knifed the windows. It whispered, tapping a code on every tin nail and salt-scarred board. Ethan woke to the soft thud of a tail against the floorboards. Ghost stood by the door, ears high, not impatient, but exact. The wind carried the iodine of low tide and the mineral chill of rock that had slept in the sea for 100,000 winters. Outside, gulls wheeled like pieces of torn paper. Ethan walked the perimeter with Ghost at his side, a habit that turned into ritual before he noticed. He checked the mooring. He tugged the knots. He tested the ladder to the landing twice, then a third time, because you don't bargain with the ocean. The shack wasn't a house so much as a tent the wind tolerated, but even a tent can be made to stand if your hands are patient. They ate in the lee of the door. Coffee for him. Dry kibble softened with a splash of warm water for Ghost. The dog waited for permission, then ate with the care of a soldier on watch, lifting his head every few bites to listen. "Yeah," Ethan said, "I hear it too. Not the wind, not the surf. The other thing. The breath-deep pulse he'd pressed his ear to last night. He'd slept badly, dreaming of rooms under stone. Work came as a mercy. He stripped the worst of the salt bulge boards from the north wall and replaced them with planks he found stacked under a tarp by the water tank. His grandfather's hoard, wood seasoned by years of patience. The hammer sang a steady meter. Every nail seated was an exorcism of a ghost he didn't have a name for yet. When the hammer made him flinch, still after all this time, Ghost would nudge a knee into place, a reminder of where Ethan's body was, not where his mind had fled. The dog's presence drew the work into a narrow corridor where time had a single direction: forward. By noon, he had rehung the crooked shutter and scraped the salt milk from the kitchen window until a rectangle of clean daylight cut through the room. He found a glass jar of screws, a coil of copper wire, and a box of paraffin-sealed matches. He found nothing like comfort. That wasn't why you came to a rock like this. You came to be told the truth in the only language truth trusted: weather and weight. The writing desk in the corner had swollen in its joints. Ethan eased the bottom drawer with the slow strength you use to free a hand from a trap. It resisted, then slid open with a sigh full of dust. Inside lay 3 leather notebooks, onion skin thin, bound with rawhide, a rolled chart wrapped in waxed cloth, a pocket knife honed to a thin moon, and a pencil stub blackened to the size of a cigarette. He sat on the floor with his back to the cold wall, and Ghost lay down so their shoulders touched. The first notebook wasn't a diary. It was a log of tides and temperatures, sketched arrows that showed where slicks formed after east wind. There were notes in block hand about thermocline, sound channels, shipping lanes beyond the shelf. The language wasn't decorative. It was a map made of listening. Midway through the second notebook, the handwriting shifted from neat to narrow, letters compressed as if the writer had started keeping secrets from the page itself. Ethan read, "This ledge carries the deep like a bell throat. Granite lens. Nights calm enough you can feel hulls past 10 miles off as weight in your teeth. Not a thing to build a life on, unless you mean a watch." At the margin, Sosis circled twice, then scratched out. Under it, no. Not theirs. Mine. He turned a page, a small drawing of the fireplace base, measured, cross-sectioned, labeled with lead. An arrow pointed to a seam. The caption said only, "For the keeper after me." "Old man," Ethan breathed, "what did you do?" By late afternoon, the rain thinned to a mist that drifted through the open door like breath. Ethan built up the hearth until the room warmed from bone outward. He put the notebooks on the table where the light from the window made the ink lift. He unrolled the waxed chart. The hand-drawn coastline bent like a shoulder shrugging against the Atlantic. A dot marked Seawolf Ledge. Beyond it, a faint pencil line traced a path into deeper water where the blue on the paper went almost black. Ghost had positioned himself between Ethan and the fireplace, sphinx still, not guarding the heat, but measuring it. Every so often his ear flicked toward the stone base and he made the smallest sound, something between a question and a warning. Ethan set the compass from the mantel beside the chart. The needle quivered and settled. He tapped the glass, a habit without purpose, and watched the needle point home. Lead, he said aloud, testing the taste of it, the word heavy in the mouth. A container? A shield? Or a coffin? Near evening, the low thump of an outboard came from the fog. Ethan met Jed at the landing with a rope in hand. The fisherman's boat carried 2 jerry cans, a crate of groceries, and a brown paper parcel twined with string. "Standing order," Jed said. "Your grandfather paid me up through this month. After that, we'll see if you're still on the rock." "I am," Ethan said, "at least tonight." Jed carried the parcel inside and set it on the table. He didn't sit. Men like him learned to keep one foot moving. He raked the room with a glance that noticed things and politely left them alone. His eyes landed on the notebooks. He nodded once. He wrote at night, said it was easier to hear then. "What was he listening for?" Ethan asked. Jed considered. He used to say, "There's noise, and there's voice. Noise doesn't care about you. Voice is the thing that finds you in a room and speaks your name. He was waiting for something that knew his name." "That ever come?" Jed scratched at the worn weave of his cap. "Not to me." He tilted his chin toward the hearth. "Though he did spend a day on his knees with that stone, swearing like a priest. Said it wasn't ready to open yet." "Open," Ethan repeated. Jed tapped the parcel. "He left this for whoever took the watch. Told me to hand it over when I decided the man deserved it." Jed lifted one shoulder. "Looks like I decided." After he left, the house felt larger, which is another way of saying emptier. Ethan cut the twine and unwrapped the paper. Inside lay a heavy iron pry bar with a flattened tip, a bundle of oilcloth, and a brass tool the size of a fist, machined with teeth like a gear. A T-handle slick from use. He turned it in his hands. It made the same promise all good tools make. "If you ask the right way, I will move what shouldn't move." Night fell without being invited. The horizon folded itself up, and the water became a bruise under breathing clouds. Ethan read by the kerosene lamp while the storm rebuilt its argument. The words on the page blurred into the sound behind them. The pulse rose again, sub-audible, stomach-deep, climbing the spine of the house. Ghost lifted his head. The fur along his shoulders stood up in a slow tide. He left the rug, padded to the hearth, and lowered his nose to the stone. His breath fogged the granite. Then he made a sound Ethan hadn't heard since certain training bays a world away, high, narrow, aching. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't fear. It was grief tuned into a warning, the sorrow howl. Ethan set the book down and went to his knees beside him. He spread his fingers on the stone where the notebook's drawing had marked a seam. The granite felt like ice he'd forgotten the name for. He pushed. Nothing. He scraped along the edge and felt not a shift but an argument in the material. Stone that wanted to be more than one piece. Ghost pawed once, claws ticking a private metronome. "Okay," Ethan said. "Okay." He stood, fetched the pry bar, the oilcloth bundle, the brass T-tool, and the lamp. He cleared the hearth. Ash pan grate, the old kettle that had welded itself to neglect. He set the lamp low so the light raked across the floor. In grazing light, truth arrives. Scratches become letters, seams become doors. There, the faintest hairline along the rock's left edge, a place where soot had failed to cling. He set the flattened tip of the pry bar into the gap and leaned his weight in like you lean into an oath. The first push did nothing except send a judder through his arms. On the second, the stone gave the smallest exhale, the kind of sound a locked jaw makes when it remembers it has to open for bread. He stopped, breathed, listened not with ears but with the full body. The house paused with him. The ocean kept its counsel. Ethan moved the bar a hand's width along the seam and pushed again, not harder but more honestly, aligning his weight with what the stone wanted. The slab lifted a breath's thickness and settled back, a promise that it could lift more if he learned the right sentence. He wedged a drift pin under the lip and tried again. Ghost stood almost nose to granite, eyes bright. The sorrow in him had rearranged itself into purpose. On the fourth try, the slab rose a full inch and stayed. Cold air spilled out over Ethan's hands. Dry, metallic, old. He braced the pry bar with the drift pin and shouldered the weight until the slab tipped like a shield, giving up the fight. Beneath lay a rectangle of black that swallowed the lamp's light. Not dirt, not foundation. Smooth, dull, lead. The air that rose from it smelled like coins you hadn't touched since childhood. Ethan lowered the lamp. The cavity was big enough for a man's forearm and long enough to say someone meant this to hold more than a keepsake. From the oilcloth he unwrapped a narrow chisel and a pencil. He marked the edge, because men who work with wood and stone trust marks more than memory, and eased himself back until the tremble left his arm. He waited, listening for a change in the sea, in the wind, in the dog. The house will tell you when you're breaking its rules. The house made no complaint. Ghost watched the black space with attention so complete it seemed like prayer. At the bottom of the cavity lay two objects. One was wrapped in oilskin, the other was bare metal that caught the lamplight like a quiet laugh. Ethan reached in, careful as if the past could bite. He lifted the oilskin bundle first. Inside, another notebook, smaller, sealed along its edges with wax, a title stamped blind into the leather, silence code. He set it aside and reached again. The second object came up heavy. The brass T-tool's twin, but not a twin. The teeth were different, the shaft longer, the head engraved with a diagram of 3 arrows, left quarter, pause, right half. The kind of instruction a man writes for his future self when he knows he'll have all the courage he needs but only half the time. Ethan sat back on his heels. The room felt too small to hold what his hands held. He ran a thumb over the stamped title. The wax along the notebook's edge had cracked but held. He looked at Ghost. "We don't open you wrong," he said to the book, which is another way of saying to the dead. He stood, the tools in his hands, the lamp low, the ocean heavy. Outside, a wave hit the ledge hard enough to move the air in the room. Somewhere under the floor, in the stone, in the sea, the pulse answered. Ethan lifted the oilskin book to the lamplight. In its shadow, the brass tool's teeth threw small, sharp constellations on the wall. "Tomorrow," he told the house. "Tonight I listen." And with Ghost pressed warm against his leg, Ethan sat on the floor until the lamp burned low, learning the shape of the silence as if it were the only language that could tell him who he was. Night wasn't just darkness anymore. It was a machine. Every gust of wind turned like a dial, and somewhere in the walls of the world something adjusted its frequency. Ethan sat by the dying fire, the last coal breathing orange. Ghost's head rested across his leg, heavy, loyal weight. The wind outside didn't just scream, it counted. 3 long howls, 1 short, 3 long again, then silence, sharp as a blade cooling in water. On the table lay the Silence Co's journal, its wax seal cracked but unbroken. Beside it, the brass T-handle with its 3 engraved arrows. Left quarter, pause, right half. He turned it in his palm. It felt too precise to be random, or as if it had been waiting for his hand alone. Some things, he thought, aren't meant to be found. They're meant to be answered. When the last ember went dark, Ethan rose. He didn't bring courage, just discipline. The kind you earn by surviving orders that kill other men. Ghost stood without command. Not obedience, understanding. The lamplight skimmed the floor, thin as moonlight under a locked door. Ethan slid the pry bar into the hairline seam at the base of the hearth and leaned with the slow patience of someone listening to his own pulse. The stone groaned, a low, throat-deep sound like something remembering how to move. Ghost let out a short, contained growl, the kind that means yes more than no. On the fourth push, the slab shifted and yielded. Cold air rose, dry and metallic, not the damp breath of seawater, but the sterile chill of time sealed too long. Below lay a cavity lined with lead, black and dull, a grave for something heavier than death. Ethan lowered the lamp. Two objects waited there, one wrapped in oilskin, the silence code journal, and the brass key, its teeth intricate and cruelly precise. It wasn't a key for a door. It was a key for an answer. He warmed the wax against the lamplight and peeled it away. The first page smelled of oil and ink that hadn't seen air in years. My name is Julian Croft, Naval Acoustic Division. This rock isn't useless. It's a bell throat. The handwriting was tight, disciplined at first, then frantic as the pages went on. There were diagrams of sound refraction, sketches of undersea ridges, notes about acoustic convergence zones. One entry read, "This ledge carries deep current like a cathedral pipe. Granite lens. On calm nights you feel ships pass 10 miles out as pressure in your teeth, not a life, a watch." A phrase circled in red ink. "Sosis. Not theirs. Mine." And beneath a hand-drawn cross-section of the hearth. Lead core. Access for the next keeper. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Grandpa," he whispered, "what the hell were you building?" The next day brought a slow, apologetic rain. By evening the tide receded, exposing 3 jagged stones reaching up from the surf like 3 fingers. Seaweed clung to them, long and tangled, witch's hair. Ghost. Bounded ahead, paws sure on the slick granite. He stopped near the western cliff, nose pressing against a patch of rock that seemed too smooth, too symmetrical. Ethan knelt, brushed away algae, and there it was, a small gear socket, carved into basalt. A perfect fit for the brass key. He inserted it carefully. Left quarter. Pause. Right half. The sound that followed wasn't mechanical. It was geological. The sigh of something ancient agreeing to move. A thin crack traced itself across the wall, glowing faintly as dust fell. Then the entire panel slid inward, noiselessly, like a vault surrendering to its rightful owner. Beyond it, a corridor, dry, straight, a smell like ozone and old copper. Ghost looked at him. The question was silent but clear. Ethan nodded once. "Let's go." The echo of their steps changed. Wood became steel. Air became vacuum. The corridor's walls were coated in matte black acoustic foam, the kind used to erase echoes. At the end, a naval-style hatch with a handwheel. He gripped it, expecting resistance. It turned smoothly, freshly oiled. When he pulled, the seal hissed, air escaping from another era. The door opened into a circular chamber carved from the rock itself. The floor was a mesh platform suspended by steel beams. Around it, curved consoles, black screens, dormant lights, a control room buried beneath the ledge. Ghost stepped forward, tail down, alert. His eyes tracked the ceiling on every hum, every flicker of invisible sound. On the wall near the hatch stood a switchboard labeled in faded marker, Wave Reg, Cooling, Bus A, Bus B. Julian's notes had mentioned this exact order. "Power sequence, pull by hand, wait 10 seconds, listen." Ethan flipped the first switch. A deep hum rolled under his boots. The ocean stirred. The lights on the rack blinked from amber to green one by one. He pulled cooling. The air changed temperature, thinning into something sterile. Outside, the wind softened, as if the world itself held its breath. Bus A, click. Bus B, click. Tiny relays ticked in sequence, like rain on tin, precise, planned, patient. Then, in the center console, under a mica guard, a single switch labeled Array Online waited. Ethan met Ghost's eyes. "Ready?" Ghost stared back. Silent approval. He pressed it. The curved screen lit with soft phosphorescence. The Atlantic, rendered in sound. Concentric ripples pulsed outward from a point-marked sea wolf ledge. Faint, shifting colors moved beneath, blues, greens, and deep violets flowing like currents of memory. He could see whales, bright arcs singing in slow motion, cargo ships, violet streaks across the grid, and beyond them something larger, older, nameless. At the screen's edge, etched into a brass plate by hand, use this to protect, not to profit. The watch is yours now. Ethan touched the metal with 2 fingers. Aye, sir. A low exhale filled the room. Like breath through a submarine vent. A red light blinked above the auxiliary terminal. Then a voice, feminine and even, came through the ceiling speaker, calm as a surgeon, warm as distance. Hello, Keeper. Mara is awake. Ethan froze. The voice wasn't human, but it wasn't machine either. It was designed to land gently, on both fear and faith. Identity confirmed, Ethan Cole, it said. Lineage, Croft, acoustic division, pulse stable, companion shepherd status, vigilant. He stared at the ceiling. You know a lot about me. I know what the stone remembers, Mara said, and what the sea repeats. What does it remember? Only sound, she replied softly. Sometimes that includes people. On the monitor, a waveform appeared, slow, massive, rhythmic, 0.7 hertz. It moved like a heartbeat trapped inside the planet. Ethan adjusted the frequency filter, isolating it, not seismic, not mechanical, a living pattern. Ghost tilted his head, ears twitching to match the invisible beat. Source? Ethan asked. Below the ice shelf, Mara answered. Amplitude increased after Julian Croft's final entry, recently synchronized with the shepherd's heart rate. Ethan looked at Ghost. The dog gave a faint whimper like, almost harmonic. Mara's sensors caught it instantly, overlaying it on the graph. The 2 frequencies aligned for a moment of perfect sync, then drifted apart again. Ethan rested both hands on the console. He didn't look like a man exploring. He looked like a man taking his post. If this is a weapon, he said, voice low, I'll shut it down. If it's a distress call, I'll listen. Neither, Mara replied. It can kill if misused, but it was made to remember. It knows someone is here. It knows you. Ethan's throat tightened. It knows my name? Not your name, the voice said after a long pause. The name it gave you. On the screen, the 0.7 hertz signal fractured, then reorganized into 3 bursts, 3, 1, 4. Mara processed them, translating via Julian cipher. The letters blinked onto the display, E-T-H-A-N. Ghost threw his head back and howled, a high, pure note. Mara captured the waveform, overlaying it again. The 2 signals merged, the dog's cry and the deep pulse, before splitting into perfect resonance. Ethan exhaled. In that moment, the silence wasn't absence. It was attention. All right, he murmured. If this is the watch, I'm here. In the corner of the display, new text appeared, automatically unsigned, JC. If you're reading this, it means the stone has accepted your weight. Outside, the tide rose. Inside, the hum deepened. The heartbeat of the ocean shifting, remembering. Ethan placed his hand on Ghost's head. The dog pressed closer. The light flickered once, not warning, just acknowledgement. And for a brief, impossible moment, the silence felt alive. They called the late shift dog watch because sailors used to divide it. 2 short watches instead of 1 long ache. Somewhere along the way, the name stuck to the way time stretches when the world forgets to breathe. At 1600, the sea shed its daylight voice. The wind lowered itself, like someone dimming a lamp, and the station's room in a rock became the only bright thing on Seawolf Ledge. Ethan took his seat at the central console. Ghost circled once and settled with his ribs against Ethan's boot, not sleeping, just choosing a position from which to hear everything first. On the main display, the 0.7 hertz swell drew its slow, sovereign line. Other colors passed, violet cargo traffic far offshore, shrimp beds stuttering like rainfall, a distant blue arch where whales spoke low to one another. But the room's gravity belonged to the line that never hurried. "Welcome to Dog Watch," Mara said, voice even. "Recommend heart rate pairing protocol to reduce sympathetic discomfort." Ethan cracked his knuckles, winced at the small loudness, and nodded at nothing. "Show me." The side monitor lit an overlay of Ethan's vitals, pulse, breath, skin temperature, trivial things until you put them next to the planet's slow heartbeat. A thin white line traced his pulse. It skittered a touch fast. The .7 hertz wave rose under it like a tide under a dock. "Inhale on the crest, exhale on the trough," Mara murmured. "Let the body remember a slower engine." He followed. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Let the lungs fall open. At first the lines fought each other in Mochine, human quickness refusing to kneel to geologic patience. Ghost lifted his chin and set it down again with a sigh that belonged to old rooms. His breath fell into the same count without being asked. The white line softened. His pulse learned to hang for an instant on the crest of 0.7, a rider finding the horse's rhythm. The ache behind his sternum dialed half a turn looser. "Sustained synchronization reduces false signal perception," Mara said. "You will still see things. You will know they are not there." "You're a comfort," Ethan said, dry as rope. "I'm an interface between your autonomic panic and a very large metronome." He almost smiled. Almost. On the corner of the console lay Julian's oilskin journal, weighted with a socket wrench to keep the pages from closing on their own. Ethan turned to the section labeled Dog Watch Protocols, the neatest handwriting of the lot, like a man sitting up straight at his desk at midnight. Rule 1. Never run the array to prove you can. Run it because the sea is asking a question. Rule 2. If you must choose between clarity and kindness, choose kindness. The ocean rarely is. You must be. Rule 3. When the pulse and the dog agree, you defer. He read the third rule twice. Ghost's ear twitched as if he'd heard it across time. Below, a cipher grid. Letters married to numbers, coordinates, to phrases. In the margin, breathe with it, then read with it. He let the breath count settle in his bones and began to translate. A sentence emerged, slow and stubborn. Where the sea breathes out, the stone sighs. He penciled it on scrap paper. Then another. At the dog watch, follow the kraken's hair to the trident. He frowned. They'd already followed seaweed Isrars, witch's hair is to the cliff, and opened the vault. This sounded like the same coastline described as if by someone who loves story more than maps. Maybe it was a warning for a different day. Maybe it was 2 doors to the same room. He wrote a third line as it resolved, "If you feel the house move, go below." That one didn't require interpretation. At 1710, a loose screw in the ventilation decided to be a percussion section. Ethan noted the pitch, reached for a flathead, and tightened the chatter to silence. Outside, the ledge's skin grew slick with incoming mist. Seawater climbed its narrow steps with patient hands. Ghost rose, padded to the far edge of the catwalk, and stared up. Not at anything visible, but at the place where the rock's acoustics focused sound at skull level. He made a sound like a word that had lost its vowels. Mara captured it and spiked it into a short-lived yellow on the graph. "Barometric pressure dropping," the AI said. "Frontal boundary will present in 60 to 90 minutes. Gusts to 40 knots. Recommend securing topside." Ethan toggled a lift cam. The shack above was a blacker silhouette against the gray, windows reflecting nothing but the sea's thinking. He zoomed to the mooring. Lines clean, knots true. The ladder flexed once and remembered its job. He exhaled without a voice. "You can still go up," Mara offered. "I will," he said, "when the house asks." Ghost returned, brushed his flank against Ethan's shin, and lay down with his paws just across the boundary of Ethan's boot, a small border treaty. "The longer you listen, The more the head tries to make pictures from sound. He knew this. He'd taught it to new sailors whose first nights on headphones birthed impossible ships on dead water. At 1740 he saw her, not in front of him, but stitched into the corner of the room where the dim light refused to go. A woman about his mother's age, hair pinned back, parka hood down, mouth set like a dock line. She held a metal clipboard to her chest like people used to hold prayer books. For a fraction of a second, he believed she had lungs to draw breath and a throat to clear. The breathwork saved him. He didn't chase. He watched the vision abide and then be braided back into the low-frequency roar. False sight, Mara said. Crosstalk between the amygdala and a probabilistic echo model. The station guesses what you want the past to look like. What makes you think I wanted that? You didn't flinch, she said simply. He didn't look again. Ghost didn't even glance. The dog knew. A room's true head count better than a camera. At 1817, the 0.7 hertz waveform shivered, then sharpened as if someone had licked a finger and smoothed a wrinkle. Mara's cursor blinked. She lowered her voice without changing volume. There. The line brightened, split into 3 brief pulses, then settled. 3, 1, 4. He had seen that pattern earlier. ETH. This time a 4th little swell lifted, not quite full, as if something underwater had tried to rise to the surface and then chosen to stay with the dark. Say it, Mara whispered, the first time she had ever sounded like anything other than a tool. It is easier for some systems to learn you if you give them the sound. Ethan, he said, and felt ridiculous and reverent at the same time. The room did not laugh. Ghost hummed low, the throat sound of a dog deciding not to bark. The 0.7 hertz pulse swelled 0.5 millimeter on the graph. That was all. That was enough. The first strike of wind hit the cliff at 1900 like a hand dropped flat on a table. Everything man-made on the ledge answered. The shack above made a low whomp and then settled into creaks as old as its nails. The array's signal-to-noise ratio shifted, colored static nibbling at the edges of the sound map. Mara compensated, filters bending like reeds and then straightening. Hold the rhythm, she said. Ethan breathed with the line and felt the body learn again. Breath on the crest. Wait. Fall down the far side, find the trough. He felt absurdly like a child doing exactly as he was told and being rewarded by a universe that had only one rule: obey, and you get to stay. A new signature edged onto the display from the shelf. A thin blue filament against a moil of storm noise. Not wide like a freighter or bright like a pod, knife-like, patient. He froze. His fingers didn't. They adjusted gain on a different axis, and the filament clarified. Mara said nothing at first. Neither did he. Biologic? He asked finally. Negative, Mara said. Propulsion minimal, profile low, possibly submersible class, exploration or interdiction. Range increasing. Heading indirect. Indirect how? Like someone who isn't looking at you but knows where you live. His chest tightened. The breath count tried to flee. Ghost's tail thumped twice without joy. The blue filament hesitated as if listening back, then eased 1 degree south and blurred into the storm's hiss. Gone? Ethan asked. No, Mara said, patient. He understood that word very well. He wrote a single sentence in the log, thin blue at the edge of the shelf. Patient. By 1940, the wind behaved less like air and more like a set of hoisted chains. The station's rock body absorbed it without argument. But the shack above began to pry at its hinge with the weather. A crack reported itself as a long-boned pop. Dust fell from a steel brace and turned golden in the lamplight. Ghost stood as if a string had lifted him. The sorrow howl formed in his chest and did not come out. He pressed his shoulder to Ethan's leg and leaned that small, insistent weight. Now. Julian's third line rang clear. If you feel the house move, go below. They were already below. But the instruction had another shade to it. Go farther. Ethan took his flashlight, placed a hand on the shepherd's back, and moved deeper into the circular room under the central arch where steel ribs met bedrock. The hum changed timbre by a quarter-inch of pitch, not louder, truer. Structural risk minimal, Mara said, reading stress, but this position offers best shelter if the shack detaches. Noted, he said, and let the breath count be the loudest thing he made. The storm hurled a single fist that made the ceiling ring like a struck anvil. Then the swing passed. The next blow did not arrive. The wind, having shown his size, chose to circle. It was almost 2000 when the world outside decided to argue with the world beneath. The wind re-sharpened, and the 0.7 hertz pulse strengthened. For a minute they beat against each other and created a third thing between them, a slow, powerful tremolo that turned the hair on Ethan's arms to needles. Ghost lifted his head and sang, not the keening grief of warning, but a long single note that found the tremolo's center and held it there like a child calming a horse. Mara didn't speak. The speakers didn't need to. The line on the screen steadied. The tremolo dissolved into one clean wave. Ethan's throat burned like he'd swallowed snow. He sat down and wrote the only words that mattered. Ruraro 20 dog watch, pulse paired, storm holding, unknown at shelf learning patience. He closed Julian's book with a palm pressed flat to the leather. He didn't pray. He performed the closest thing he still believed in. He listened. The station listened with him. The array purring along the rock's grain. The sea breathed in, breathed out. Somewhere not yet close, something waited with its engine quiet and its eyes open. When 2000 came, he didn't feel relief. He felt permission. Dog watch complete, Mara said, soft as cloth. You took it well. No, Ethan said, hand on Ghost's head. We did. The shepherd blinked slow, that ancient language that means you finally said what the room already knew. He exhaled, rolled to one side, and slept the way soldiers do, light as a coin in the palm of a friend. Ethan sat through the first minutes of the next watch anyway, because some habits are not for you. They're for the door you're sitting in front of. Above them, the shack creaked without surrender. Below them, the rock kept its counsel. Between them, a man, a dog, and a voice that had learned to keep him alive kept the only promise that matters at sea. They stayed. Dawn didn't so much arrive as admit it had been watching all night. Clouds pressed low, a single unbroken lid of pewter, and the Atlantic under it looked like something held in a jar too long. The shack's boards had dried to a salt-crusted stiffness that made new music when Ethan stepped out to check the mooring. Ghost ranged to the edge, nose high, then returned without being called. His ears said storm again. His tail, still deliberate, said not yet. Inside the vault room, the hum was gentler, like a sleeping animal too tired to pretend it wasn't alive. Ethan set coffee on the mesh and opened Julian's oilskin journal to the cipher grid he'd started during dog watch. He sharpened the pencil with the pocket knife until the wood peeled away in a perfect spiral. Recommend nutrition intake before extended decoding, Mara observed. Coffee counts, Reynor, he said. Only if you measure time and heartbeats. That's exactly how we're measuring it, he said, and took a slow sip. Ghost settled with his chest against Ethan's boot again. That had become the count-off, a small flag planted on the border between alarm and work. The cipher wasn't a simple substitution. Julian had braided coordinates, tide levels, and time blocks into the same grid, as if he wanted the reader to decode the message while listening to the ocean's grammar. Ethan aligned the 0.7 hertz pulse on a side scope and matched it to Julian's dog watch time marks. The letters fell out in stubborn little clusters, not elegant, but earned. He wrote in block letters on a scrap pad, Beneath the western rib, power takes the sea's knee. Breathe is key. Breathe is code. If they speak, do not shout back. Hum low. Count 3. Hold 1. Count 4. Doors open on stillness, not force. He circled the line, breathe is key. Breathe is code, until the pencil threatened to tear the paper. Mara, he said, can the array transmit? Not actively, she replied. Design is passive to avoid detection. However, the structure can respond. We can impose modulation on certain mechanical subsystems that couple to the rock. Which subsystem couples best? Wave regulators on the west face, she said immediately. The tidal converter, your grandfather's power source, it breathes the sea. Ethan ran a palm along the console. If the station is a lung, then the west cavern is a diaphragm, she finished. Ghost huffed once, a canine punctuation mark. They went out at low tide under a sky the color of steel filings. The western face of Sea Wolf Ledge dropped into a narrow chute where the swell rose and fell in slow prayer. Bolted into the rock, half hidden by kelp and kelp's shadow, were heaving plates linked by pivots and rods, Julian's wave energy converter. It moved almost imperceptibly, but when it did, Ethan felt the station under his boots take a deeper breath. The rib was a span of reinforced basalt where steel flanges vanished into a maintenance slot. Ethan lay on the wet stone and shone his light inside. A service ladder went down and sideways. The wrong direction if you liked certainty, the right direction if you wanted to find where power turned into language. Ghost stood watch at the mouth, triangle sharp against the sky. The wind riffled his fur from tail to ears and left it smoothed as if by a hand. Stay, Ethan said, not because the dog needed instruction, but because the word steadied the man. He slipped into the slot and felt the ledge's body change temperature around him. The maintenance tunnel opened into a cavern that didn't feel man-made so much as persuaded. The walls bore scars of drill bite, sure, but beyond that the shape was natural. A throat-shaped chamber where each wave drove a set of oscillating flaps. The mechanism was simple, brutal, elegant. Plates that rose and fell in phase with the swell. Driving hydraulic pistons that sang soft vowel sounds the human ear couldn't claim to hear, but the bones could. Ethan stood on a graded walkway that straddled the machinery. Every few seconds the whole cavern did something like a bow, a subtly synchronized flex, and the station upstairs answered with power. Acoustic coupling confirmed, Mara said in his ear. We can impose micro-modulations on flap timing. It will not sound like speech. It will sound like permission. Good, Ethan said. Speech is rude when you don't share a language. He knelt, put his fingertips against a support. The steel hummed with EO.7 in a way his skin took personally. Julian says breath is code. How do we breathe back? We time the flaps, Mara replied. 3 long lows. Hold 1, 4 long lows. That aligns with the ETHAN you observed. But we must send it as absence. Micro pauses in the diaphragm, not pressure spikes. Doors open on stillness, not force, he said almost to himself. Back in the control room, Ethan strapped the headset down over one ear so he could keep the world's air in the other. The side monitor showed the timing racks for the wave regulators. Tick marks like a music score. I'll open a control window for minimal disturbance, Mara said. We will likely not be alone on the band. The shelf is noisy. If they are who we think they are, Ethan said, they already know how to hear in noise. Understood. On your breath. He waited for the crest of 0.7. Inhale. Count. The cursor reached the mark. He exhaled and tapped send. The wave regulators did an almost imperceptible hesitation. 3 times. The array, passive but never stupid, watched for reflected changes. Silence. Which here did not mean nothing. It meant a room full of people holding the same thought. Ethan counted the hold. Then 4. The cavern below complied with small absence after small absence. Ghost stood by the console, head canted. The hair along his spine did not rise. That was either very good or deeply bad. The .7 hertz line trembled, the way a muscle does when it is considering a different habit. It dipped once, twice, 3, held, dipped 4. Echo, Mara whispered. Ethan's heart stuttered and fell back into count. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He only answered the same way, once more. The line swelled and, like a whale surfacing in the far blue, and came up higher than before, revealing edge structure and harmonic fringes the array hadn't shown yet. It wasn't random. It was stacked. A chord built from distances. "They're building," Mara said. The tiniest something in her voice sounded like wonder. "Or remembering," Ethan said. He returned to the journal while Mara logged the modulations. The next page wasn't a grid. It was a sketch of the tidal diaphragm, annotated with fractional marks that matched the regulator's micro pauses. Beneath it, Julian had written in blunt pencil, "The ocean will not read your alphabet. Offer it your bones." In smaller hand beneath, "If you must choose a word to give your life, choose listen. All other words can be taken from a man." Ethan traced the fractional marks with the pencil tip, then tapped them into the control window. Mara translated the fractions into phase delays. The caverns below absorbed his choice and held it at the edge of readiness. A singer with an open throat waiting for the conductor's eyelid. The line on the screen drifted, not up or down, but close. He felt it in his sternum like the first ache of a cold coming on. Ghost made a tiny chuff noise. Not alarm, not ease, a taking note. "Incoming modulation," Mara said, her harmonic content increasing. Sidebands at 1.4 and 2.1 hertz. Multiples. "They're stacking around us," Ethan said, "like bracing a door." "Or setting a table," Mara offered. He didn't know whether to laugh or count. He chose the second. The sky dimmed without the day consenting to it, the way a room goes darker when someone you love leaves it. The storm built like a case in court, methodical, merciless. On the far right edge of the main display, the thin blue filament returned, a neat line slipping along the shelf, so slim it looked like a scratch in the screen. "There," he said, "our patient friend." "Gain up 2 decibels, Mara said. AI tracker on low profile." The filament altered speed by a fraction. Not enough to say hello, enough to say I heard you saying hello to someone else. It didn't point its nose at Seawolf Ledge. It drifted, an actor pretending to forget his mark while hitting it perfectly. "Biologic distractors?" Ethan asked. "None. This is a human machine behaving like a listener more than a hunter. But listeners can be rented by hunters." His knuckles went white. "Range?" "Increasing, then decreasing, testing distance fidelity under storm cover." "Clever bastard," he muttered. Ghost gaze skipped from the filament to Ethan's face and back, as if to say, "I cannot bite a line on a screen. Tell me when it has a throat." The first hard gust hit the ledge at 15:30, earlier than forecast, shouldering the shack. A thin crack shivered along a ceiling seam and dripped grit. Ethan and Ghost moved under the central arch, their agreed-upon sanctuary, and stood there, one hand in fur, the other on steel. "Recommend delay on second contact sequence, Mara said. "Structural load rises under gust." "Julian says doors open on stillness, not force," Ethan murmured. "We wait." He held the breath count through the first rush, the second, the third. The diaphragm below continued its work, not fighting the storm, integrating it, using the extra motion to charge. In the relative lull between gusts, Ethan caught it. A whisper on the sidebands, like sand sliding down a glass throat. He tuned the scope tighter, false color brighter. The line of 0.7 carried texture now. Tiny fibrils climbing and releasing like the noise of a thumb over a drumhead. "Mara?" he asked. "They're adding grain," she said softly. "A tactile layer, teaching us to feel them with skin instead of ears." Ethan closed his eyes, breathed with the crest, and felt the sternum ache shift, not pain, pull, an invitation across a bridge he had not seen until he was already on it. "On my breath," he said, "on the stillness." "Window ready," Mara replied. The storm exhaled. The ledge hovered in a brief, impossible balance. Ethan tapped the phase delays they'd prepared. 3, hold, 4. Gentler, smaller, like teaching a child the shape of a letter with your fingertip. The cavern obeyed. The regulators held back in micro-instants, opening absence instead of forcing presence. The rock carried that absence with elegance up through its spine. The 0.7 line lifted, added grain, and returned the phrasing. 3, hold, 4, with a 5th faint pulse stitched in at the end like a smile you don't intend to show. Ethan didn't move for a full count of 10. Ghost pressed his shoulder to Ethan's shin and stayed. Outside, the wind gathered itself to be ugly again. On the shelf edge, the thin blue filament ticked half a degree closer and pretended to be coincidence. Ethan wrote in the log without looking down. First contact, breath as code, response with texture, blue listener edging, doors prefer stillness. He set the pencil down and realized his hand was shaking, not with fear, but with an emotion that has no polite word. Awe would do. So would grief. "You're not alone," Mara said. Not an analysis, a sentence. "I know," he said. "That's why I came." The station held its breath with him, and in the deep, something answered. Not with language, but with the feeling you get when a hand finds yours in the dark and squeezes once to say, "Here." Part 1 ends with a breath that finally answers back. Ethan and Ghost wake a hidden acoustic station, pair their hearts to a 0.7 hertz pulse, and speak a name the deep can hear. Off the shelf, a courteous listener holds its distance, while a heavier hunter learns the hard way that some doors open on stillness. The storm isn't over. The rock remembers, and somewhere below a third door is waiting. If that slow pulse is still in your chest, subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next chapter. Tell me in the comments who or what do you think the deep really is, and what should we ask it next? Click the next episode, Part 1B, Chapter 6-9, The West Face opens, and let's step through.